Welcome to TruthCraft, a channel devoted to pursuing the truth while playing Minecraft. In this video, I want to talk with you about what I believe is the most important argument for God's existence, at least from a philosophical perspective. It's called the Cosmological Argument, and while that might sound complicated at first, once I get into it, you'll see it's pretty intuitive. After I explain some different versions of the argument, I'm going to address a few challenges that have been brought against it as well. Really though, this argument has never been answered sufficiently, and make sure you watch to the end to hear all about this. A quick note about the Minecraft gameplay. What you're seeing is a classic Let's Play, and I know that's a throwback, but I'm hoping it's going to be entertaining while also allowing you to focus on the content of the video. Keep in mind that I'm pretty much a noob to Minecraft. I played a decent amount about a decade ago, but I haven't really picked it up since, and so what you're watching is as close as I can get to a new player logging into survival mode and trying to figure things out. Now, back to the cosmological argument. It's important to note that this argument is not trying to prove the existence of a particular God, or that there's only one God, or even that God is a person. This argument is simply trying to prove that God exists and is a being or thing with no beginning and no cause. But this being or thing began and caused everything now in existence. Now you might wonder why I'm making those qualifications, but in fact, once we understand that the argument is not trying to prove the existence of a particular God, or that there's only one God, or even that God is a person, a lot of the objections to the cosmological argument actually fall apart before we even start. Now this doesn't mean that I don't think there are good reasons to believe that God is a person and not a thing, but that'll have to be the topic of a different video. Now, there are many different versions of the cosmological argument, going back in some ways to Aristotle, but the 12th century Muslim theologian Al-Ghazali put it this way. Proposition 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning. Proposition 2. The universe began to exist. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its beginning. This argument is called a syllogism. A syllogism begins with a major premise, something broad, continues with a minor premise, in this case a specific example of the major premise, and then concludes something from these two premises. So here we have the claim that if something begins to exist, it must have a cause. And since the universe began to exist, it follows logically that the universe must have a cause. Again, premise 2 is really just replacing the first phrase of premise 1, whatever begins to exist, with the universe. When placed in this format, it's easy to see that if premise 1 and premise 2 are true, then the conclusion must logically follow. But are premise 1 and 2 true? Let's look at them individually and give some reasons why we can be confident that they are. And here I'm following the philosopher William Lane Craig. First, premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning. This one should be pretty easy, right? I mean, we all know that something can't come from nothing. I don't think it's truly possible to believe that something can come from nothing while living a normal life on this earth. Everything we do in life is based on the idea that actions have causes and are causes of other things. We would never expect to come downstairs one morning to find that our coffee has magically been made and poured into our favorite mug for, well, no reason whatsoever. On the contrary, it's clear to us that unless we pour the coffee grounds into the machine, fill it with water, and press the button, we're not getting any coffee. If we do nothing, what we're going to get is precisely nothing, and it's absurd to think anything else. And to be honest, if this isn't true, then pretty much all of scientific and rational endeavor is useless. The scientific method is built on the idea that events and things must have causes that can be discovered and explained. This is how we began to understand things like gravity, heliocentrism, DNA, you name it. Every scientific breakthrough has been the result of rational people committed to the idea that there are causes and reasons for why the world is the way it is. But what about premise 2? The universe began to exist. Now, let me read to you what William Lane Craig says about this premise, and I'll link the article in the description. It's very frequently alleged that this kind of argument has been invalidated by developments in modern mathematics. In modem set theory, the use of actually infinite sets is commonplace. For example, the set of the natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, etc., has an actually infinite number of members in it. The number of members in this set is not merely potentially infinite, according to modern set theory. Rather, the number of members is actually infinite. Many people have inferred that these developments undermine Ghazali's argument. But is that really the case? Modern set theory shows that if you adopt certain axioms and rules, then you can talk about actually infinite collections in a consistent way without contradicting yourself. All this accomplishes is showing how to set up a certain universe of discourse for talking consistently about actual infinites. But it does absolutely nothing to show that such mathematical entities really exist, or that an actually infinite number of things can really exist. If Ghazali is right, then this universe of discourse may be regarded as just a fictional realm, like the world of Sherlock Holmes, or something that exists only in your mind. Craig goes on to give an illustration of how absurd it would be to imagine that an actual infinite could exist in reality. It's a mental experiment from the mind of the German mathematician David Hilbert. It's called Hilbert's Hotel. Hilbert first invites us to imagine an ordinary hotel with a finite number of rooms. Suppose, furthermore, that all the rooms are full. If a new guest shows up at the desk asking for a room, the manager says, "Sorry, all the rooms are full," and that's the end of the story. But now, says Hilbert, let's imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and let's suppose, once again, that all the rooms are full. This fact must be clearly appreciated. There is not a single vacancy throughout the entire infinite hotel. Every room already has a flesh and blood person in it. Now suppose a new guest shows up at the front desk asking for a room. "No problem," says the manager. He moves the person who is staying in room number 1 into room number 2. The person who is staying in room number 2 into room number 3. The person who is staying in room number 3 into room number 4, and so on to infinity. As a result of these room changes, room number 1 now becomes vacant, and the new guest gratefully checks in. But before he arrived, all the rooms were already full. It gets worse. Let's now suppose, Hilbert says, that an infinity of new guests shows up at the front desk asking for rooms. No problem," says the manager. He moves the person who is staying in room number 1 into room number 2. The person who is staying in room number 2 into room number 4. The person who is staying in room number 3 into room number 6. Each time moving the person into the room number twice his own. Since any number multiplied by 2 is an even number, all the guests wind up in even-numbered rooms. As a result, all the odd-number rooms become vacant, and the infinity of new guests is easily accommodated. In fact, the manager could do this an infinite number of times and always accommodate infinitely more guests. And yet, before they arrived, all the rooms were already full. I think from a logical perspective, it's pretty clear that the idea of an actual infinite number of things is simply incomprehensible. It doesn't make any sense to us. Now, let's summarize. 1. Whatever begins to exist is a cause of its beginning. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe is a cause of its beginning. We noted that if premise 1 and 2 are true, then premise 3 follows from them as a clear conclusion. To think that either premise 1 or 2 is false is to run into absurdity. Either the absurdity of believing that something can come from nothing, or the absurdity of believing that an actual infinite number of things can exist. Therefore, I think we can say with confidence that the conclusion is true. The universe did have a cause, and that cause we call God. When you step back to think about this argument, you realize just how intuitive it is. It's really the simplest explanation for where the universe came from. Everything we see in our world has a cause. Everything we've ever known and all the events of our life have been caused by something else. It makes perfect sense to think, well, the universe too must have a cause. And of course, we see this reflected in biblical texts as well. Genesis 1:1, for example. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There is no cause given for God. He simply exists in the beginning, and yet he is the cause of everything. Now, before I go, I should address one common objection to the cosmological argument. The objection goes like this. If it's true that everything has a cause, wouldn't that apply to God as well? It's all well and good to suppose that the universe must have a cause. But then whatever caused the universe must have a cause. And whatever caused that must have a cause. And so on and so forth until we end up with what we rejected beforehand, an infinite regression of causes and events. So, how do we respond to this? Who caused God? Well, notice that Al-Ghazali did not say that everything has a cause, but rather that everything that begins to exist is a cause. If that's true, then there must be a cause that didn't have a beginning. That's why it's totally justifiable to call this cause God, because this cause is not like other things within the universe. It must in some way be above and before the universe as uncreated and eternal. In fact, far from disproving the cosmological argument, this objection demonstrates why it must actually be true. The reason that the unmoved mover or the uncaused cause must exist rather than an infinite regress of movement or causes is precisely because, by the definition of the argument, God is an independent being. The reason the idea of an infinite regress is so problematic is that nothing within it can be said to be independent. That is, as far as we can tell, there is nothing in the whole universe that sustains itself. Nothing simply exists. Everything we know about in the universe is made up of other things. Everything that has happened for other reasons. How could a blade of grass or a cow come into existence on its own? How could that car crash you got into last year have happened for no reason whatsoever? It simply defies logic. This is exactly why it is necessary to say that there must have been something or someone whose nature it is to simply exist. This person or thing had no beginning and no prior cause. It simply is. So, really, the cosmological argument asks us to decide between infinite regress of matter and the unmoved mover. Infinite regress must be rejected precisely because there is nothing in matter that could make it, well, infinite or eternal. In other words, we have every reason to believe that it is impossible for matter to exist eternally. Therefore, the only other possibility is that something had to be there at the very beginning, but this something itself had no beginning and sustains itself. This is the far more plausible answer, for while it seems logically impossible for matter as we know it to exist eternally, this unmoved mover could indeed exist without a beginning, since this is in its nature. But what kind of god or gods is this unmoved mover? Well, that'll have to be the subject of another video. So make sure to like and subscribe to stay tuned for more content dedicated to pursuing the truth. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. See you next time.